Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this, I believe it's the 8th session of HealthyU, a series of conversations. Thank you, those of you who braved this, much needed inclement weather, and coming out in person, and for those of you joining from home. I am Patty Roberts. I'm the Deputy Director here for the City of Port St. Lucie Parks and Recreation Department, and I am truly honored, and those of you who have joined us yet again, thank you for your support of this program. But HealthyU has been around since November of 2020. It is a program that is extremely near and dear to my heart, but I do want to go over a couple of just general housekeeping items, please. There is a voluntary sign-in sheet at the registration table. Again, voluntary for anyone who wants to sign in. We do have food and drinks available here, so feel free to jump up and grab anything that'll sustain you for the evening. For those questions that I hope will come out of this presentation tonight, for those in person, we'll wait, if it's okay, till the end when our presenter is finished, and then we'll go ahead and address any questions that you might have. For those of you viewing from home, simply enter those into the Q&A, and at the end of the presentation, we will go through those questions as well. So everyone will get those off. I would ask, please, everyone turn off their cell phones, and for those of you maybe new to the community center, the restrooms are out these doors and to the left. Okay? As I mentioned, HealthyU is a program that's very near and dear to my heart. The topics that we've been discussing thus far are very sensitive and sometimes very tough in nature to talk about. We have covered thus far depression, anxiety, domestic violence, trauma-informed care, suicide prevention, opioid use disorder, and last month's session was on bullying, which was offered by our Port St. Lucie Police Department. Those are tough conversations to have, but if they're never talked about, these diseases and mental health issues remain lurking and are not addressed. I have a very real personal interest in exploring some of these topics, and it was just 1,019 days ago, and yes, I do count in days. My son Danny Roberts died from a heroin overdose that was laced with fentanyl. Danny died right here in Port St. Lucie. He was 22 years young, and he had struggled with his disease for 8 years. My husband and I were right there with him throughout that 8-year battle, and once that tragedy occurred, I realized that I had two options. I could either shut down and deal with my tragedy and devastation that it wrought into our lives, or I could make a conscious effort, which is very difficult, it was for me, to talk about these tough issues. Danny was diagnosed throughout his 8 years with several mental health disorders, obviously in addition to his addiction, but some of those were anxiety, depression, and bipolar disorder. So these are topics that are very relevant, very real out there. If anyone thinks that any of these topics, even the one being presented tonight, will never touch them, I believe they're living in a dream world. This can and does happen to anyone. And so if nothing else, HealthyU is about talking about it and raising the awareness to these topics. Some future topics that we've got coming, the next one, next month, is on dementia. We're also doing one on eating disorders, and then we'll revisit anxiety again. That was, there's a lot of anxious people out there right now throughout the impacts from the pandemic. So just looking back on everything that HealthyU has talked about, I'd also like to share as well that this year was our first year as a department celebrating May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We just got done with it. It was a phenomenal success. And please keep in mind, I don't measure our mental health programming such as HealthyU, or May is Mental Health Awareness Month, by numbers. That to me is not the definition of success. To me, it's the number of lives touched. And we offered throughout the month of May 9 total free events to the public. 2 were guided walks at our beautiful parks, Woodstock Trail and Woodland Trails. And then there were 7 free yoga classes. They were all held outdoors, and you wouldn't believe the amount of participation we had. I myself went to the last Thursday nights, and it was out at Veterans Park at Rivergate, right there on Veterans Parkway. And I mean, there were 15 or 16 people who came out, and you're overlooking the St. Lucie River, and it was, 6 o'clock at night. It was absolutely gorgeous. And these people just thoroughly enjoyed yoga. And it's just that moment to take a moment, practice self-care. We all need that, and pay attention to your well-being. So that's what this program is all about. And that's what HealthyU is bringing to you tonight. So I want to chat just a little bit before I bring in our very, very subject matter expert on this topic. The topic that we're going to discuss tonight is gender violence. And it's talking about sexual exploitation and human trafficking. And I will tell you, I shared with you one of the reasons why I launched this program is not just to talk about it, but to learn about it. And this is a topic for which I need to learn about. I understand, and I know our presenter is going to share it with us, this is stuff that's happening right here in Port St. Lucie. So we need to be aware that it's here in our community and how we can respond to that. So today it's my extreme pleasure to share with you an important message from a subject matter expert on the topic of gender violence. Ms. Carissa Bolden is the Executive Director of Catch the Wave of Hope. She is also the Board Chair of the Human Trafficking Coalition of the Treasure Coast and Okeechobee, and the owner of AACE Therapy Service. And so without further ado, I would present to you Ms. Carissa Bolden.
Thank you so much. So I'm really excited to be here, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of my background so you at least know who you're talking to, and then I'll kind of jump into it. And I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm a talker, so I will talk to you guys much more than we're looking at slides or kind of going over what the basic information to kind of guide the conversation. So gender-based violence is just such a very broad topic. There's so many different things that we could really be fine-tuning and narrowing down on this. And so the way that I did it was really thinking here in Port St. Lucie, how can we cover the gender topic and then also see how it's relevant and how we can grow within our community and learn. So first about myself, I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I started my career in downtown Chicago working with boys in a correctional facility. It was a medium security adolescent correctional facility. And then I moved down to Florida and I started working with teenage girls ages 13 to 21 in maximum security correctional facility, right here in Stewart. So, and through that time was when I started learning about human trafficking, just all of the mental health and really understanding the fact that all of these kids had severe trauma. And so trauma is kind of where my heart is at as well. But really, honestly, sitting with these kids and hearing their stories, and the stories just started seeming a little bit too similar, especially when I've got a kid that's from the Panhandle and a kid that's down in Miami, and they're telling me the exact same story, and I'm going, something's not adding up here. So as I started to learn about what human trafficking was, that's when it all kind of came to light for me. And what I realized was people think human trafficking is something that is, it happens overseas. They're going to get taken, like the movie Taken, or it's going to be a kidnapping, and they're going to be, unfortunately, so a lot of those stories are the ones that hit the tabloids. But what you don't hear about is the manipulation. You don't hear about the coercion, the power and control, the gender-based violence that goes into this that's really allowing them to control our kids. I mean, the average age of kids being recruited right now is 12 to 14 years old. They don't want adult women in sex work. They want little kids. They want our 12-year-olds who are trying to figure out who they are. and not just girls, boys as well. And there's certain populations that are being targeted for this, and I think it's important that we recognize that, I'm talking about gender-based violence, not just violence against women, but some organizations do use those terms interchangeably. But we're going to talk about the whole thing and make sure that we're trying not to leave out any populations that are impacted by this and really just kind of narrowing it down. So some of the objectives for today. We're gonna learn the definition of gender-based violence. Again, like I said, it's an umbrella term. So I'm gonna give you what the United States is using as far as they're now developing a strategy. But one of the things that I'm also gonna put out there before we go any further is there's not a lot of research on gender-based violence in the United States. There is a ton of global research in regards to gender-based violence. But when we're talking about the United States, it's just starting to become a topic that's even being explored by our government. So this is something that we really need to perk up our ears and listen and pay attention to, because in the coming years, it's going to become more and more of a topic. Not human trafficking, I'm talking about gender-based violence and recognizing the inequalities and how people are being treated differently based on their genders and gender identities. So then next we're going to talk about some of the main types of gender-based violence, including the human trafficking and sexual exploitation. That's kind of where my heart is, so you guys will hear me kind of jump back to that a lot. It's not because I don't think these other topics are important, it's more because that's my experience, and I think that speaking from experience is much more valuable than speaking from research. So I have the research, and we'll touch on the research, but really that experience is something that I can give you guys that you might not be able to get by searching the internet on your own. Then we're going to learn about some of the root causes and contributing factors of gender-based violence. What's underneath it all? Where is this actually coming from? Why is this actually even an issue? And then really also identifying the consequences that it has for survivors. What is it doing to our society? How is this impacting us? And I'm going to touch on some of the very preliminary suggestions as far as how we can start to address this as a society. But when I say that, I mean there is very little being done right now. The United States just started in 2019 their first development of any kind of strategy to address gender-based violence. And really it was, we're just gonna start collecting some data and information and figure out what this is and if it's even a problem, rather than, okay, this is a problem and this is how we're gonna address it. So again, this is definitely an important topic that we need to be talking about. And I'm gonna tie in my experience working with our local adolescents and teens in therapy. Not only do I work with sex trafficking survivors right here on the Treasure Coast and provide them with mental health therapy, I also work with your everyday teens who have anxiety and depression. And Patty, I wanna thank you for sharing what you did at the beginning of this, because that openness and that willingness to be honest about those diagnoses and the struggles and the pain and the hurt that comes with it and the reality of mental health problems is what's going to help us get farther in our society. That's what helps us grow. I work with a lot of kids who at first they're going, oh my God, please don't tell my friends I have a therapist. Please don't tell my friends I have a therapist. And then one friend happens to find out, or kind of mom slips up or something, and then they go, oh, I don't even care anymore. All my friends have therapists. I'm like, okay, yeah, like last week you were disowning me as if I didn't exist, and now this week you're proud and you want to tell your friends that you have a therapist. So I think we are moving in the right direction. It's not the same as it was for our generation. We're not where we need to be, but I think the discussion is happening more and more frequently, but because of people like you who are willing to be open and honest and have these conversations. So I'm really blessed to be here. So really quickly, we're gonna just define the difference between sex and gender. So sex being biological, physical differences between females and males, and something that doesn't change unless there's a surgical intervention. And gender being social differences between males and females, determined by social factors, which include history, culture, tradition, societal norms, and religion. And these can change over time. It's an important distinction because here is our first definition. And this, again, every organization kind of has a different definition. They're basically similar, but some of them use violence against women and gender-based violence interchangeably. And really, gender-based violence is the umbrella term, and then violence against women falls under that category. So gender-based violence is defined by the USAID, and that is the strategy that I was just referring to. as violence that is directed at an individual based on his or her biological sex, gender identity, or perceived adherence to socially defined norms of masculinity and femininity. And I'll tell you, I was looking through all these definitions going like, which one do I want to put in there? Which one do I think really encompasses what we need to talk about today? And with it being now, and trust me, I am all about May and Mental Health Awareness Month, but now we're in Pride Month. You know, we're in LGBTQ plus awareness, and we're talking about that as well. And that's something that we need to pay attention to as well. And that added piece at the end there, because a lot of organizations just see it as either somebody being, you know, violence being against them based on their sex or gender. This adds in the perceived adherence to societal norms, right? So whether that's a girl dressing more like a boy or a boy dressing like a girl, and they're not being feminine enough or not being masculine enough, and those expectations, which we're hearing more and more conversations about people, you know, trying to raise their kids in a gender non-conformed household. You know, you can play with dolls or you can play with trucks. Who cares? And it's interesting seeing the research that's coming out of it, and then also seeing like some of the different perspectives. You know, not everybody thinks it's good, and not everybody is against it either. I think we're all just trying to figure out what it all means. And unfortunately, our kids are figuring it out before we do, the younger ones. And so it's just a matter of all of us working together rather than it being a competition of, is it right or is it wrong? It's happening. So how can we as a society be supportive of these people and how they're identifying and how they're being mistreated, and recognizing that? You know, there is a very clear gender bias within our society. I mean, it's talked about daily, you know, just even in the workplace. It's women being paid different salaries than men. I mean, that's the class, that was in my textbooks. That's a classic one. And we're still talking about it. And we've seen very little change over the years. And that's why I'm telling you that the United States is just starting to recognize that this is really a problem, let alone our small little town here in Port St. Lucie. So this also includes, so this is physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, threats, coercion, arbitrary deprivation of liberty, and economic deprivation. So again, the physical, emotional, sexual, economic, societal abuse, whether it's occurring in public or private life. So a lot of these are between marriages. A lot of gender-based violence takes place in marriages. And people don't really recognize that when you think about gender-based violence. You think we're just talking about societal problems. But the truth is that this is public and private. This is the whole, again, like I said, gender-based violence. We're talking about the umbrella, which is useful in the weather outside right now. We're gonna need that. So who are the victims that we're talking about? Mostly women and girls. They are the most at risk and most affected by gender-based violence. Consequently, listen to me, the terms violence against women and gender-based violence are used interchangeably, like I had mentioned before. However, boys and men can also experience gender-based violence, and so can sexual and gender minorities, and that's important to bring out. Like I said, I don't want to just talk about the violence against women. I think sometimes it's almost like a broken record in that it's being talked about only from one angle, and we're not seeing this as the bigger problem that needs to be addressed. Regardless of the target, gender-based violence is rooted in structural inequalities between men and women and is characterized by the use of abuse, physical, emotional, and financial power and control. So that's really what this all boils down to, is power and control, which is also one of the root causes for any kind of sexual violence, rape. It's 9 times out of 10 is not sexual. It's not about sex. It's about power and control. And it's important to recognize what the underlying motive is there. So if people are feeling that they need to gain this power and control, that we're going to see an increase in violence, which is what we see in war, which is what we see overseas when huge wars break out. There's a ton of rape and there's a ton of violence, and that's what happens, is people searching for that power and control and taking it in whatever way they can. So as far as physical, these are the different types. So this is going to break it down a lot. If I had like 5 hours, we could go through every single topic of these. And honestly, still, I'm not a subject matter expert in things like the honor killing and maiming. I don't, those are things that are important to talk about. Those aren't things that we're seeing here right now in the United States. That doesn't mean they're not important. It doesn't mean they shouldn't be addressed. But like I said, it was really difficult for me to kind of narrow down what I wanted to share and what we should talk about today. But infanticide, so the trafficking and slavery, and then the physical assault are some of the physical pieces of gender-based violence. When it comes to the emotional, which is honestly what I really want to focus on today, is the emotional abuse and the emotional types of gender-based violence that we see. So it's humiliation, it's degrading them, it's victim blaming, it's slut shaming, it's all of these things that probably were talked about in the bullying as well. And I have never seen more bullying than I have in the last year. Throughout the year of 2020, and I mean that from the age of 6 up to, high school. Actually, you know what? Adults are bullying each other these days. They very easily are quick to bully each other online and in person, but they're much more willing to do it online, when they can hide behind a screen. And that's really what we're seeing, are people really coming out with their true opinions because they think that they can hide behind their screens. But we're also getting to the root of the problem, which is what's underneath of all of this, right? Yes, we're annoyed by people's posts and you can block them and you can ignore them, but at the end of the day, why as a society are we conforming to this violence and this competition and this bullying of one another and humiliating each other? I'm not just gonna be against you, I'm gonna make you feel this big. I'll do whatever it takes to make you feel small so I can feel bigger. And it doesn't work, and unfortunately, people aren't willing to take the time and stand back and say, this isn't working, what else should we do? It's just this vicious cycle that we get stuck in, which we're gonna talk about in a minute. But the intimidation and the threats, the confinement and isolation, which thanks to COVID-19 has made it much easier for those that are the ones in control and the ones that are using these tactics to truly control their victims. I mean, now they don't have to leave their house for anything. They don't ever get the chance at the grocery store to pass by someone who says, are you okay? Or do you need help? Or why do you have all these bruises on you? Matter of fact, they can hide them in their house for months without anybody ever knowing, and they can justify it as, well, I'm worried about COVID. And unfortunately, we've also seen a huge rise in the amount of reporting of these issues. So how are we reporting more of these issues, but yet there's less people to report it, right? Can you imagine what's actually going on in our society right now? And I'm talking adults. Just think about all the kids who are being abused, who the parents are coming home and taking out their violence on their kids because they've done that forever, but now my kid, I have unlimited access to him. Matter of fact, I can beat them all day long. They don't even have to go to school anymore. They have that access, and unfortunately, it's just helping people not deal with their problems. So as a society, it's our turn to try to find a way to get to them. Regardless of any barriers that exist, we have to overcome those barriers and find a way to help people get the help they need. This is the social exclusion, ostracism based on their sexual orientation. So you know what? It's kind of like parents telling their kids, you want to identify as that? All right, fine, I'll just keep you in the house. You're not going anywhere. Oh, you think you're gonna go hang out with that person? No, you're not. You're gonna stay right here. And they can justify it. It's socially isolating them. And I'm gonna say this, and I hope we have some parents thinking about this today too, but social media and being off of that in today's world is also a form of social exclusion for teens and adolescents. And I say that reluctantly. I have teens and adolescents at home, and I greatly dislike social media. Actually, I despise social media. It is rooted in this need for other people's approval instead of learning to approve yourself. However, when they don't have that, they are actually excluded from social events. Their friends won't talk to them because the only way they talk is Snapchat these days. Who knew? They don't even text each other anymore. Oh, you're texting? Well, I'm not wasting my time. Literally, our kids are going through depression, suicidal thoughts, all these things if they don't have the access to their friends and peers, and especially with the pandemic going on. Not only do they not get to see their friends at school, but then they're not going to be able to be a part of what's going on after school. And it's so much pressure. They're dealing with so much. So we're going to get into that a little bit too, because that plays a huge role in the gender violence that we're seeing today, especially with the pandemic. Sexual, so forced marriages, sexual exploitation, forced prostitution, survival sex, which we're going to talk about a little bit as well. rape and marital rape, child sexual abuse, defilement, and incest. So these things have been around forever. They've been around since we can even tell, since humans have existed. So to say that we're going to get rid of this problem is not realistic. To say that we're addressing it and that as a society we're not accepting it and that we're going to do what we can to protect our innocent and our young, that's a different story. And that's where I come from when it comes to my job as the executive director of Catch the Wave of Hope. We work against child sex trafficking, and we're willing to recognize the fact that we are up against a massive monster. I mean, this is such a big problem in our society, and it is so deeply ingrained and rooted in the I don't want to call it the lifestyle, but the underlying themes of everything that we see in our government, in our relationships, in our friendships, in the way we socialize. It is everywhere. So this isn't something that's going to be solved overnight, but it's something that needs to continue to be talked about so that people can actually see it for what it is. And I'll tell you, having two 12-year-olds at my house this entire week, I have learned so much about the pressures that they're dealing with in all of this. I mean, every day they're getting pressure and pressure and pressure. It's to send nude photos. It's to, to have this profile, to post more stuff, to be likable. It's all about like, oh, you have to do what everybody wants you to do so that you're liked. And it's completely missing the boat. They don't even see it for what it is. They are so blind to it, because they are just innocent kids trying to figure out who they are. And without that approval from whatever source it is they're seeing it, they don't think that they're worth anything, because nobody is teaching our kids otherwise. And I say that with like a deep sadness, because honestly, I don't even want to blame the parents, because they don't even realize what's happening when they plop their kids in front of that screen. They don't know that they're actually contributing to that kid feeling worthless and really not having a source to build their self-esteem and their self-worth. And let me tell you, traffickers are really, really good at what they do. And by that, I mean emotionally manipulating women in general, and especially young girls who are looking for approval or recognition or acceptance or love and belonging. If we're talking, and I'm not going to get too psychological on you, but if we're looking at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, love and belonging is right there under, we're talking about right here. We're not talking about self-actualization up there. They're just trying to feel accepted and loved. And part of that has to be with friends and peers, not just with family. And when we recognize that and see that, they're not passing that level, because we weren't built as human beings to have the opinions of hundreds of thousands of people every second of every day on every single thing that we do. We were built to have the opinions and validation from a small circle of close people who care about us as individuals. And it's ruining our kids, because guess what? They can get 5,000 likes, and then they get those 2 nasty messages, and guess which stick with them the most? So all of our kids are being exposed to this, and they don't realize the detriment it has. They don't realize how badly it's hurting them until we start to have these conversations. And by that, I mean having the conversations with the adults. Because no matter how many times I had that conversation in the last week, I'm telling you what, they still were all over that phone. They're still on there checking it. And I'm going, well, I know you heard me, but did you hear me? And you realize they can't hear us, because they're not focused on that family piece. They're focused on, how do I fit in the world without you? And sometimes that carries into adulthood. People are still trying to figure out how they fit in the world. And if we're giving them the wrong sources, then they're more likely to be abused. When we're talking about economic gender-based violence, discrimination, denial of opportunities, again, like I mentioned earlier, in the workplace, forced marriages, early marriages, denial of education for women and children, we see globally, we see locally, we see everywhere. And I think that there is going to be a huge shift, and this is just my personal opinion, in our education system coming very soon. And I'm really interested to see how it goes, but I hope it goes in the way of equality, not into segregation. And, I don't want to go backwards. I think we need to move forward, and that's where I'm going to kind of give some of my own personal thoughts on some things that we can start doing today to try to change the conversation. So this is the power and control wheel. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this. I feel like I could recite this in my sleep, only because I'm constantly pulling it up to help people see that they're not alone. And I mean that by, in the center, we have that power and control, and then we have all these methods, and then what we see on the surface, physical and sexual violence. So unfortunately, when you're looking at it, when you're looking at data and statistics, all you see is the violence and the data of the sexual assaults and the batteries, and they're just collecting data. But what we're not seeing is the methods underneath here. And we're not seeing, you know, the economic deprivation of, that's fine, I'll just cut off all your credit cards and you can't go anywhere. You know, it's all in my name anyhow. You don't see those methods. And instead we're going, why doesn't she just leave him? Why don't you just get away? Why don't you take your kids and run? You know, and it's just simply not that easy because there's so many different methods of power and control. So the coercion and threats, making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt, and I'll tell you, this says her, and I didn't like that, and I looked for a long time to try to find one that said, you know, him or her, or made it a they, and unfortunately, they were too busy. I was trying to keep something simple up here, so I decided I was just going to explain myself when I got up here about that. So it does say her, but again, a majority of those who experience gender-based violence are girls and women. So I said to myself, you know what, it's okay, it's not inclusive, but at least we're still talking about the important pieces. So making and or carrying out these threats to do something, right? Threatening to leave them, threatening to commit suicide. If you leave me, I'm just gonna kill myself, and that's on you. You have to live the rest of your life knowing that I killed myself because you broke up with me. I heard it when I was a teenager. Nowadays, they're actually trying to kill themselves in order to prove that they'll follow through on their word. And some of that is just being a teenager and thinking that, oh, somebody will get me out of it. I don't actually want to die. I'm just trying to prove a point. Do you know how many times I've heard that? And do you know how close those exact kids were to actually killing themselves? And it's all because they're hyper-focused on this need for acceptance and this fear of rejection, right? Fear of failure, which goes back to, you know, every kid gets a trophy. Right? We're now realizing the backlash of that. You know, for a while it was like, well, you know, they're trying, recognize their efforts. And then now we're dealing with a bunch of people who seem to feel entitled to have those rewards, regardless of whether or not it's earned or whether or not it's something of value. They don't see it as valuable. They see it as an expectation. And so if they don't have that expectation, then there's a perception of, I'm not worthy and I don't deserve to be here, instead of, I just can try harder. Or maybe this isn't my thing. Maybe I can try something different. Maybe that's not the right person for me. Maybe I need to find someone else. That doesn't register. It is like, if they don't love me, no one will love me. And that's kind of where we're getting into black and white thinking. I'm a big proponent of dialectical behavior therapy because it really changes that all or nothing attitude. And I think we can all benefit from that, especially watching, you know, with social media. Like, I'm gonna go out again, seeing people's opinions of like, if you don't agree with me, then you're stupid. That is literally the environment that we're seeing. That's what people are thinking, and they're literally blatantly saying that and putting other people down. But there is hey, guess what? You can be right, and so can I, and we can have different opinions, because based on our own different experiences, we're both right. We both have valid points, and it doesn't mean that one's right or wrong. So recognizing the coercion, the threats, I'm getting back on topic here, as you can tell, making someone do illegal things. So I saw a lot of this working in the corrections. I saw a lot of, you know, forcing these kids to sell drugs, forcing them to engage in pornography and prostitution, forcing them to do all kinds of things. And then actually they make them believe that it was their choice. And it's not that hard. It's, well, do it for us, baby. You got it. Like, come on, just this one time. It's not that big of a deal. Like, come on, you said you wanted to get that house on the beach. Like, come on, just a couple of nights. It's not that, and it's so easy for them to use these things against them, their weaknesses, their needs, their vulnerabilities, you know? And the truth is that 12 to 14 age, I think we can all remember, was one of our greatest vulnerabilities. There is not a person on this planet who is not vulnerable at 12 to 14 years old. And that's what they figured out. And that's why that's that golden, crisp age. They have access to them, and they know how to rope them in. And we're not doing a good enough job as a society to protect our kids. And a lot of the people that I treat also are adults. You know, they're in their 30s and 40s, and were trafficked as teenagers. and still dealing with the anxiety and the trauma and the fear and all of that and trying to figure out, how do I fit in this world? Am I worthy? Or is that just kind of my fate? That's all I was meant to be. So it's not something that just goes away. It's not something that can be addressed in a Baker Act or in a crisis stabilization unit. These are real deep-rooted problems that will follow them through the rest of their lives. That power and control and losing that power and control is one of the most significant things that can impact someone's mental health. Using intimidation, so I had a lot of clients, and especially in the corrections, who had witnessed murders. A lot. And when I say that, most times they were right next to somebody who was getting killed, who was being stabbed, or who was being drugged behind a car, or things like that. And then they go, well, did he actually ever put his hands on you? Oh, he didn't actually hurt you? So why didn't you just leave? Well, they knew what was going to happen to them if they did. They watched that other girl mouth off to him, and look what happened to her. And they use that as an example. They make sure it's in front of them so that they see that. They make sure that they, that violence is in front of them. And believe it or not, I had multiple kids sit in front of me and say, I like it when he hits me. It's funny. It's like, it's just our thing. And I'm sitting there going like, I don't even understand how can you say that in a group setting where they're then validated by their peers. Yeah, my boyfriend used to hit me too. Like, it's no big deal, but like, whatever, he loves me. And it's that they truly are in this place of like, that's just what we deal with. Rather than, that's not okay, we have to find a different way. There is no other way for them. That's just what happens. And so being able to recognize that intimidation and that level of, and I'll say this, and some people might get it, loyalty, because trust me, every teenager you talk to goes, I'm very loyal. And I'm like, I hate that word. I hate the word loyalty. You are only ever loyal to yourself. Nobody else is worth being loyal to. And I say that in the way of loyalty is dangerous, because the second that you decide that you are undeniably loyal to someone, the second that you have now given them all of your power and control. Whether that's in a marriage or not. You in a marriage, it is a union. It is not a you and then me. It is a us, and that is so important for us to recognize as a society. Using isolation, so keeping them from being able to go to social events or things like that. Again, pandemic has brought that forth. I told you guys I could talk. I warned you ahead of time. Using the isolation, so controlling what they can do. You can't hang out with those friends. You can only do this. Oh, no, you're not going out. Where do you think you're going? You better get back over here, that kind of stuff. Using the jealousy, right? Well, it's just because, like, I don't want anybody else looking at you, so I don't want you leaving the house, right? Or, well, I love you so much. Like, that's why I'm so angry that that guy just walked past you, or that girl just looked at you. It's this justification of like, well, I'm jealous because I'm just so in love. That's not real. That is a use of intimidation and power and control. That is a way to control you and manipulate you. So these tactics they're so underneath the surface that's why I'm going through these so detailed, because we miss them all the time. And by we, I mean adults, I mean kids, I mean elderly, I mean children, I mean we as a society are missing these cues. Nobody is collecting the data on these little on the amount of jealousy that's going on in relationships these days, right? You can't walk past someone without them being like, oh, did you just check them out? Did you just look at that person? Like, gosh, like at what point do we stop being able to walk down the street and being accused of these things? And at what point do we recognize what it is just a way of controlling you and manipulating you and challenging? And honestly, it's a mutual thing. This is not just a men versus women thing. Women are doing the same thing to men. And this is where we have to have this conversation of equality. It has to be equality. The minimizing, denying, and playing. I didn't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. I saw you do it. I don't know what you're talking about. Whatever, you're just acting up. You're just being jealous. You're just acting crazy. You're just acting a fool. It's that putting them down, putting them back in their place. These are the terms that we're hearing. Denying the abuse. Well, if you wouldn't have pissed me off, then I wouldn't have hit you. Maybe if you would have done it differently, maybe if you learned how to talk to me, then I wouldn't keep emotionally abusing you, right? They're not going to use those words. They're going to say, well, then I wouldn't keep, having to put you in your place if you wouldn't keep mouthing off to me. Again, we're seeing the gender-based violence going on with this. Using children, so threatening to take their children away. More and more people are having children out of wedlock and or getting divorced. And so like family courts are thriving these days. And they're thriving because children are a tool, and I hate this fact, but they're literally put a price tag on them. If I get the kid, you owe me this much. And if you get the kid, then I owe you that much. Since when do kids become of value, right? There is a price tag. And I hate that because the kids aren't hearing the value or the fact that it's to take care of them. The kids are hearing, you want me because you get money, regardless of the amount. And then they're hearing, oh, you don't want to let me go live there because then they'll get money. And you don't want to lose your money. You don't really care about me, you just want the money. And I hate that money and children are even put in the same conversation. So using that against them, making them feel guilty about their kids, using the kids to relay messages, using visitation to harass them. Well, like, if you don't pay me, then I'm not gonna let you see your kid. These are things that are affecting our children in a way that they aren't seeing healthy relationships, that aren't using power and control, that aren't using manipulation. And that's where, how do we expect them to grow up and have healthy relationships if we're not role modeling it? Again, this conversation goes much farther than just the physical and sexual violence that we're seeing as a society. So using male privilege, treating girls like servants, or like you need to be a housewife, or these expectations of this, and this need to get done, and you can work a job, and you can take care of all the kids, and you can, and there's a lot of expectations. A lot of women really struggled in this pandemic to maintain their careers because the expectation was, you're gonna have to go home and stay home with the kids and homeschool them, regardless of whether or not you're good at homeschooling, by the way. That is a skill, if you're wondering, to homeschool your children. We're not teachers. Not everybody is built to be a teacher, and not all of us have the patience with our own children, especially, right? I could be very patient with other people's children, but you try to get me to work on a math problem with my kids, and it's World War II. Because it is, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not what my teacher said. You got it wrong. We hear all of that. And really what that's coming down to, though, is we're, as women and moms, it's okay to say, I can't do that. Or, hey, how about you help with this a little bit? Or why don't, you take some time off of work and then I'll take some time off of work. And we saw a lot of that with the pandemic. And I'll tell you, on the other end, we saw a lot of men step up in the pandemic and say, you know what, I'll stay home with the kids. I'll take care of it. And I think that, once again, we're moving in the right direction if those men are willing to share their story and willing to be proud of staying at home and proud of contributing to the family, and women accepting the role of being at work all day and not being home with their family. I mean, these are really hard things. They're hard things that on the surface we can all say, oh yeah, like of course I'd be fine with working all day and not having to take care of the kids. And then all of a sudden you're going, am I being a good enough mom? Am I doing enough for my family? Should I be sacrificing more? Should I be staying up later? Should I be working harder? And we start to experience the same things that maybe our spouses aren't experiencing. And these are things that people are coming into therapy and they're talking about it, and they're sharing these deep-rooted gender-based power and control issues that they might not even have known or accepted that existed underneath the surface. But being the one to define men's and women's roles, I think that's really important. Acting like the master of the castle. I wear the pants in the relationship. This is my house. I'm the man of the house. I'm the woman of the house. You respect me. I'm authority. All of these things are power and control. And as a society, we have to find the balance. So I really think that there's a way for us to address these issues without looking at them as all abuse. Right? Even though people might not have the intention of abuse, it's giving the same results. And it's worth us accepting and acknowledging, like, hey, I could probably work on that one a little bit. I think we could all look up here and see something that we identify in ourselves, that maybe we search for some power and control, that we could give up that power and control a little bit, or recognize how it's impacting the people around us, our spouses, our children, the people that we love the most. And we had mentioned a little bit before the economic abuse. So preventing them from getting a job or keeping a job, making them ask for money, giving an allowance. not letting them know about or have access to the family income. It's none of your business. Don't worry about it. I'll do all the budgeting. At some point, I think it's important to equip both genders and all genders, let me put it that way, about financial health and financial stability and financial wellness. We do a really bad job at teaching kids about financial anything. I don't even know the last kid that I met that told me they know how to sign a check and deposit money. How are we equipping our children? They're going through years and years of school and they don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to sit there and say, okay, if I make this much money, how many Netflix accounts can I get? They're not building these skills because they're going, whatever, it'll just do it automatically for me. Again, we're not equipping kids, we're not equipping families with the knowledge so that there can be equality. It's one person who takes the time and effort to know it all, and that gives them that undivided power and control. Oh, I'm going too fast. Oh, Lord. I'm going everywhere. Okay, so intimate partner violence. So these are just some statistics that I thought were worth talking about very quickly. So about 1 in 5 women and about 1 in 7 men report having experienced severe physical violence from an intimate partner in their lifetime. And I think it's important there to see that it's not just battered women. There are battered men. And women can't just hit men and say it's okay, and men can't hit women and say it's okay. It has to be a conversation. And this isn't just between men and women and women. It happens on both. It's women against each other and it's men against each other. It's all relationships. This is something that's happening, and it's very clear. I mean, we're talking 1 in 5. That's unbelievable to me. 1 in 7. So about 1 in 5 women and about 1 in 12 men have experienced contact sexual violence by an intimate partner. And I will say I think that is highly underreported. We're still working on the idea of men being allowed to admit that they've been sexually violated. That is a very difficult thing to work through, and I've done it with clients in therapy, and it's something that is challenging from a societal level, and that the fear of what that will do to a reputation or to their self-concept is what's stopping them from healing, stopping them from being able to address it or recognize it or even just admit it, even in a confidential setting. And that means that on a societal level, we're doing something wrong, and we can all start to change that conversation by empowering men to also come forward about, and even sexual exploitation. It's not just girls that are 12 to 14 years old being recruited. There's a ton of boys being recruited, and actually there's an increased demand for prepubescent boys right now. And it's under the age of 11 that is the most highly demanded sex category right now. They're looking to boys too, but nobody's really talking about that because the numbers of girls are so overwhelming, but that's probably just because there's underreporting going on, because there's not as much empowerment for men to come forward about sexual violence as there was with the Me Too movement. I mean, we saw how quickly people jumped on that, talking about all of the sexual violence they've experienced. Imagine if there was a Me Too movement for men, and one that wasn't made fun of or degraded or talked ill about, but something that was actually uplifting and made them feel empowered and capable of coming forward about those things without it ruining their life. I think there's an opportunity there for another conversation. 10% of women and 2% of men report having been stalked by an intimate partner. I thought that was pretty interesting. I think nowadays, stalking can be considered something very different, right? We're, once again, bringing up the social media piece of it. That brings a whole new dynamic, because then where do you draw the line, right? They're spending hours and hours and hours online figuring out your needs, your likes, your wants, your friends, your family, your past jobs, your past friends, your college, and they're doing all of this. At what point do we say, okay, that's a little too much? And then at what point do we say, that's on me for putting all that information on the internet? There has to be a balance. So here's a couple of more. So the gender-based violence, or violence against women and girls, is a global pandemic that affects 1 in 3 women in their lifetime. 1 in 3. 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical or sexual intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. Globally, 7% of women have been sexually assaulted by someone other than a partner. And globally, as many as 38% of murders of women are committed by an intimate partner. It's much higher in the United States. It's over 50% of women being killed are by either a past or current partner. 200 million women have experienced female genital mutilation or cutting, another form of gender-based violence. And this is where I'm talking about the umbrella, is that there's a lot of different things that fall under this category of gender-based violence. So this is a video that our organization created. It is for teens, adolescents, and adults, and it was actually shown in one of our local school districts, because now it is mandatory in the state of Florida for all children, kindergarten through 12th grade, to be educated in human trafficking in all public schools. So they are all getting this information, and no, we would not provide this information to kindergarten through sixth graders. There's a different method, there's a different way of approaching it without the word sex in it, but still getting the message across and teaching them how to protect themselves. But then really addressing what it is with these 6th to 12th graders, because believe it or not, no matter how much you shelter your 6th grader, if they have friends and are exposed to friends, they are hearing about sex. They're talking about sex. The average age of a kid being exposed to pornography is 11. 11 years old, they're being exposed to pornography. Most parents aren't talking to their kids about sex at 11. So where are they learning about it? Porn. And this is where we need, again, the conversation. But this video is just going to give you some background. It's going to give you the information, but it's really going to tell you about that manipulation piece and how they recruit. Once again, it's not taken like a lot of people think. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and then we'll kind of chat after about it. Don't enjoy it, you know what I mean. I said enjoy it. I'm sitting there like, I want you to enjoy it, but I want you to hear it because it'll speak to you.
Hi, I'm Fida Georges. I'm with Catch the Wave of Hope, a nonprofit organization fighting child sex trafficking. When I say the words human trafficking, what comes to mind? Children being sold in Thailand, or kids kidnapped and locked in cages? This is what most people picture, when in fact, they are not as common as you think. This is just how the media and Hollywood portray it. The truth about human trafficking is that many victims are lured with false promises of financial or emotional security, when instead they are forced or coerced into commercial sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, or other types of forced labor. According to U.S. law, anyone under the age of 18 who is persuaded to perform a commercial or sexual act is a victim of human trafficking, regardless of whether it's forced, fraud, or coercion. Nowadays, criminal organizations such as gangs are luring children from school into commercial sexual trafficking. The recruiters are often the same age as the children they are luring in. The average age of individuals being recruited is between 12 to 14 years old. This doesn't only happen in foreign countries or seedy alleyways. It could happen right next door.
How was your guys' tournament a few weekends ago?
It was okay. We won. Yeah.
Yo!
Took the dub.
Excuse me, girls. Do you know where the dock is?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's one like 2 miles down the road. Take a right?
Just up here to the right?
Yeah.
Thanks. One more thing. Would you like to go to a party later?
Our curfew is 8.
Well, my buddy's an influencer, and there's going to be a lot of people there and a bunch of alcohol, so maybe you guys can sneak out and give me a call.
You said there's going to be booze there?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is an example of a Romeo pimp or lover boy tactic. This is when somebody notices you for the first time, gets to know you, asks you about your hopes and dreams, as well as your doubts and fears. This stage could last weeks, months, and even years. They build a relationship that you trust and feel comfortable in, while secretly assessing your vulnerabilities and identifying any needs that are not being met. The child becomes comfortable with the individual and is under the assumption this is a genuine relationship that is loving and makes them feel accepted and cared about for the first time in their life. Then they focus on all the vulnerabilities you unveiled in the past. They buy you whatever you want, provide romance, well-being, and a sense of unconditional love. They often disguise themselves as boyfriends or girlfriends and are not considered strangers anymore. They make you feel secure, safe, and they boost your self-esteem. They help you get your hair done, nails done, or give you drugs and alcohol. It feels as though your life is the best it has ever been at this point, and you might even think it's too good to be true. Next begins the manipulation and coercion. They start to pull away that love and affection that they previously provided for you. Then they give it back and pull it away again. They make you question what you have done wrong, and then use these situations to manipulate you to do things you are not comfortable with. Before you know it, you are so far down the rabbit hole, it feels like there is no escape. At this point, they will say you owe them for everything you received in the relationship. They explain that pornography and prostitution is a great way to make the money to pay back and go back to the wonderful life promised. Remember, this is all a calculated game for them. The only way we win this fight is to be prepared, be aware, and if you see something, say something.
I got what you need. Woke up in the store and get what you want. Yeah, you get what you please. We about to get it on.
This is an example of how traffickers often use false job advertisements. Traffickers use offers of employment or travel to lure vulnerable people into sex trafficking. They tell you that they are a legitimate business and are recruiting young models, people who are interested in massage therapy, or a quick way to make cash, lots of cash. Once you arrive, everything important is taken from you, and the process of breaking in begins. During this stage, you are emotionally, psychologically, and physically abused through means such as rape, torture, threats, and degradation. These individuals witness extreme violence and even murders of other victims early on, so they quickly become compliant if they want to survive. So know what you can do. Moving forward, just keep these 5 steps in mind. Know the warning signs. Educate yourself and others. Talk to your peers and family if something is going on. Protect your personal information when online. And most importantly, build up your self-esteem and encourage those around you. Personal empowerment and true self-confidence are 2 things traffickers have no chance against.
Okay. I would love to be like, what do you guys think? But I'm just going to get through the end of this, then hopefully we can do some question and answers if there's something you guys want to share. You know, what I love the most about that is it not only provides the statistics and the basic information, but that's really what we're seeing in the United States. We're not seeing pimps and traffickers. I mean, they don't call themselves a trafficker, and they don't even call themselves pimps. They call themselves a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and the recruiters are the same age as the kids. And right here in our circuit 19, this is just last year in 2020, and I'll tell you, Palm Beach is is ranked number 3 for the amount of reports of human trafficking in our state, and Florida is ranked 3rd in the nation. And Palm Beach only has, like, I think it was 30 or 40 more. They were at like 90 something for 2020, and we're at 62. So we are not very far behind, and we are much less populated, and they are much more advanced as far as the conversation goes, and willingness to accept that this is happening. You know, but right here we had, and this is just last year, we had 62 total. CSEC stands for the commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so that was 55, and then labor trafficking was 7. And labor trafficking is something that is coming of conversation more and more. It's a lot harder to identify because you can't really tell whether or not people's needs are being met with a job as much as you can tell if someone's being sold for sex. The warning signs are much more prevalent. As far as labor trafficking goes, you're investigating an organization and a company rather than investigating, you know, an individual that's might be trafficking someone. So it's definitely something that is happening, but we're not as advanced in identifying it yet. So we're seeing more and more as people are becoming more educated in it. However, the CSEC, the commercial sexual exploitation, is skyrocketing. And as you can see from the 2019 to 2020, that was a massive jump. And for the last 3 years that I was part of the coalition and collecting this data, we stayed pretty flatlined around 40. I think 1 year is 39, another year 42, another year 40. It was there for the 3 years up until 2019, and then 2020 jumped up to 62. And again, this is when we didn't have mandated reporters in schools. This is when kids weren't going to school. This is when, you know, there was isolation going on, and we thought, oh, there's gonna be no reporting. And the complete opposite happened. We had this jump. So now can you imagine the amount of kids that are being exposed to it, that it's gonna come forth in 2021. I am prepared for another massive jump. Whether or not it's in the statistics or not, it's happening, and all of us are feeling very overwhelmed in this field as far as lack of services, a lack of resources for these survivors. I mean, we're getting calls weekly about people needing our help, and we're scrambling to try to figure it out because we weren't prepared for this. As a society, we hadn't set ourselves up by accepting that this is happening, acknowledging it. So it happens throughout different age groups. We had 3 that were from 0 to 5 years old. We had 9 that were 6 to 11 years old. And then as you can see, that number 40 that were 12 to 16. I'll tell you, in previous years, that 17-year-old range was always much higher than the 12 to 16. We're seeing that trend of it getting younger and younger. Child's background, so community just means that they weren't in the Department of Children and Families custody at the time of it, was a majority of them. 48 of them were not in foster care. And that's a huge myth. Everybody thinks, oh, well, these kids are in foster care and that's how they're being trafficked. And that's just simply not true, as evidenced by the numbers, especially right here. 13 were in foster care. Then when we look at race, we have 16 were black, 38 were white, multiple 1, and unknown were 7. And again, I think that we can talk all day about the fact that there's some underreporting going on in maybe some minority cultures, right? This is something that we'll just deal with it on our own rather than trusting to report it to authorities. So we have to acknowledge that as well. Child's gender, so there were 53 female and 9 male. And so, the reason I wanted to show you guys that is to really bring it home and to let you know that this gender-based violence is going on right here in our backyards. And it's something that people aren't even acknowledging, or you know, they're acknowledging it, but it's far-fetched. It's like, oh, human trafficking is going on, but like not with anyone I know. Like, oh, poor human trafficking victims. But then what about sexual violence? What about rape? You know, 1 in 3? I mean, you've got to know a sister, a cousin, a family member, a friend. You know someone who's had some sexual violence. So that feels much more dangerous to talk about than human trafficking. Everyone can talk about human trafficking because that's not me. That's not my family. Oh, those poor victims. Instead of us seeing it for what it is rape. It is this sex culture. It is this gender-based violence that we're seeing. It's the same thing. We're just calling it 2 different things. You know, there might be a different method to the human trafficking and a different result as far as the exchange of money, but that doesn't take away the trauma and the impact it's having on the mental health of our survivors. So the root causes of gender-based violence, as I'm kind of alluding to throughout this entire presentation, it's discriminatory cultural beliefs, and it's the attitudes that perpetuate the inequality and the powerlessness. So if we can start to change that, then we can start to make progress on this. So as you see, the power imbalance, again, I went through the power and control wheel, gender inequality, and disregard for human rights. And then when we look at the contributing factors and the risk factors, it's behavioral, it's alcohol and drugs, it's, believe it or not, boredom and retaliation. And some of that boredom, let me tell you, kids are bored if they don't have a phone in front of them for 5 seconds. And so, unfortunately, they're just in front of it more and more, and it is an addiction, and it's something that we have to start talking about as well. Structural, so whether or not they have access to services, whether or not they're in a migrant community or things of that nature, these are all issues that we're not addressing and providing resources for. So making sure that we have representation in all of these areas is very important, so that we're not missing populations that aren't a part of this conversation in here today. You know, all of those that are being discriminated against are important, and we need to make people feel safe enough to come forward and talk about it so that we can address it in all cultures and in all areas, not just in the ones that are relevant to us. So the consequences for survivors, you know, the physical injuries, the exposure to HIV, and there is the physical stuff. I'm not, you know, unwanted pregnancies, all of these things, but really that deep-rooted emotional manipulation and abuse that goes on is what sticks with them. You know, they say sticks and stones can break my bones, but words may never hurt me. That is the biggest load of crap I've ever heard, because emotions and words hurt way worse than getting hit. And that's just the way it comes down. I mean, I remember as a kid being like, can you just like spank me and get it over with so that I can like go on about my day? Oh no, making me have a conversation about what I did wrong, that was real torture, right? Making me actually admit it and accept it and apologize for it. You know, I grew up with a mom who was a teacher, and she made me talk about everything. That's why I'm such a talker. But I look back at him and I go, thank God, because I learned the value of words and the value of not using your hand or fist, because that can heal. You know, but at the end of the day, that emotional, so the victim blaming, the inability to complete tasks, I mean, the complete debilitation of your life, the suicide, the death that happens, the murders, I mean, we're seeing all kinds. I mean, I could have made this list so much longer, but it really, you know, it speaks throughout the entire presentation. It speaks throughout all of the different people that are being discriminated and hurt by this gender-based violence. It's not conducive to a small list of different things that they're dealing with. So I know I've talked a lot, but I am really excited to hopefully hear a couple of questions I can answer. Thank you guys, I appreciate it. Oh, is somebody going by?
Awesome. Well, I tell you what, that was really educational for me. The wheel of you know, the power and control, and which I think we all kind of knew that it was a power and control issue, but then seeing the statistics from the 19th Circuit, and 19th Circuit, correct me if I'm wrong, is St. Lucie County, Indian River, Okeechobee, and Martin.
Yes, 4
Okay.
counties.
4 counties. Mm-hmm. That is huge. And you know, we did one of our sessions on the opioid epidemic, and the law enforcement had given us the data from 19 to 20, did the same thing with overdoses and deaths. So are there any questions for Carissa, please?
Come on, I'm ready for it. I can handle it. I got this.
Now, see, what I always say when there are none is you covered the topic, and everything that you know people were wondering about, they got their answers. I know I did.
Yeah, well, and it was interesting when you just mentioned the opioid epidemic. That's actually very interrelated with this. We see it in just as simple as someone who's addicted to opioids needing the money and saying, hey, Honey, can you just go over and help Mr. Johnson take care of some stuff at his house? He needs some stuff cleaned. Go over there after school every day for an hour and, you know, bring me back that money. I got to pay for groceries and stuff. You'll do it for our family. You love us, right? And so they go over to Mr. Johnson's and they come home and they hand mom the money and she's, oh, thank you so much. Got my money. I got what I need. And thank you so much. And the child quietly walks back to their room and nothing is said. Nothing is noticed, and that child feels as though they have to do that for their family. And right there, you've got sex trafficking happening in our backyard. How many parents are struggling to pay their bills, let alone an opioid addiction? You know, and that's a very easy way to make that money. And there's a lot of people in demand out there. I mean, the supply and demand, we want to talk about being a business. It is one of the most lucrative businesses globally right now. It's just under the arms deals is the only other business globally that makes more money than human trafficking.
Wow, that's interesting. Awesome.
Yeah, so I would say we do see some crossover between the opioids and the victims. The biggest crossover is that a lot of traffickers tend to drug their victims, but not necessarily for their own personal gain, but more because then if they ever tried to tell on them or go up against prosecution, they can be like, she's a drug addict. She doesn't know what she's talking about. She was high. And so they'll shoot them up. And so like a lot of the kids that we saw in corrections, I didn't get it, they would cry like babies to get shots. And you know, they had to get all their vaccines and stuff when we were in there. And they would scream, can you hold my hands? And I remember being like, what the heck? Come on, guys. Like, you've been through so much. You're going to tell me a little shot's going to scare you? And then you realize it's because it's trauma. They were forced and held down and administered drugs in order to keep them compliant, you know? And it's here's the Coke for the rest of the night to keep you awake to get your job done. And then I'll give you some weed in the morning to chill you out, and then I'll give you some opioids to calm you down so you can sleep during the day. But come that nighttime, I'm gonna give you a Molly and an ecstasy and all these other things to get you going again. And that's what they do. They'll get them addicted to multiple different drugs until they have a drug of choice, and then they've got them. You know, now you owe me. So, I mean, there's definitely a bit of crossover, but not as much as far as like the traffickers being the users. We don't see that as much. But I mean, Joe Schmo off the street can sell a girl if they manipulate them into it. You know, a homeless guy or girl can manipulate a child into thinking that they're special and in love and that they're, you know, giving them all their needs met. And so, and it makes money, unfortunately. And that's where I think we need to protect our kids better. And honestly, there needs to be some things in place online and in social media to protect children. There's nothing. Like, why is it that in that we're not going to protect kids? We've got all these different ratings for the different TV shows, and, oh, we can't put this on cable TV and this on cable TV, but we're going to show our kids porn on everybody's phone? Like, at some point, we've got to start having that conversation of putting the limits on it and drawing that line and saying, no, our kids are important. We need to protect them. And we're seeing some legislation going through with that, but not as much as I would like. You know, some restrictions on what apps kids can have, messaging children, sending pictures to children, requesting pictures from children. You know, the child pornography has skyrocketed as well throughout all of this. And so I think we're going to see a backlash of that later on. I don't think people are talking about that yet. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's someone who really said that. So when I walk and I talk to youngsters, and I tell them, I said, and then think of the next generation. At 6 years old, you want to be the same, like you want that 6-year-old to go through the same thing which you have gone through. So just look at that. Care for that child rather than getting back into the cycle.
Breaking the cycle.
So whether it's man or woman, looking after the child, it's their responsibility to care for that child till they're at least a certain age.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I always that.
I'm a strong advocate of that.
Yep.
Especially when I talk to the youngsters, who I meet at work.
Yeah, I make a lot of kids angry when I have the conversation of privacy is a privilege, not an expectation. When you're a child, it's the expectation that you are protected, and we can't do that if there's not transparency, right? You can't protect your kids if you don't know what they're being exposed to. How do you even know something bad's going on their phone if you can't get onto it because they have their privacy? You don't have privacy until you're paying that bill, let me tell you. That's my phone, I own that, right? And that's what it comes down to, is like, we have to start communicating that. Most children are not told that. They're given this, like, you get privacy. And it's not that the kid is the problem, and that's the conversation I keep having, is don't blame your child for getting all of these nasty messages or people talking to them or sending them nude photos. That is not your kid's fault. That is happening on every single child's phone that's on, you know, some of these apps. And I don't want to name them off specifically because it's not the app's fault, but it's happening. Whether or not you admit it or whether or not your kid admits it, it's happening. So why aren't we talking to them about it? Why aren't we protecting them from it and doing it in a way, you know, society is also making it almost impossible for us to protect our kids, because if we do, then they're suicidal and they're being socially isolated. And it's this game that we're playing, this balance of how do we teach them how to protect themselves at such a young age. How do you teach a 6-year-old to be smart online? You know, to not follow. You remember back in our day, it was the email scams where you got the one and it was like, send this to 10 people or else you're going to have bad relationships for the rest of your life. And you're like, oh crap, I'm sending them, like, I'll send it to 20 people, right? And we all fell for that at first. And our kids are, it's a different form and it's going on online, but they're just as, you know, easy to be like, oh yeah, if I send 7 emojis to these 7 people, and then they're trying to build up the numbers, and it's just that easy to get them in, and nobody's having that conversation of like, that stuff's not real, you know, that's not, you don't have to do that. I mean, it's the little things I think that we can start with, maybe not those really tough topics, but if we're starting with the little conversations, we can lead to those more difficult ones. But I agree with you, I think comes in. Right. Yeah, and yeah, depending on what age you're working with, you know, the younger, you can focus on the positive behaviors and ignore the behaviors that you don't want. They're more focused on getting your attention than they are on what they're actually doing. You know, so if you focus on the good things, they're going to want to do those things more. You know, I always tell people, like, stop telling your children that they're bad. Like, oh, you're so bad. Oh, she's so bad. Look at her over there doing that. Oh, she thinks she's grown, or like she thinks she's so, like, you know, adult and this and that, or she thinks she's so independent, and that we're sending the wrong messages to them. We're almost empowering them to be bad. We're telling them, you're so bad, you're so bad, you're so bad, and so they're going to start owning that. That's what they start to believe, and we're not realizing that that's what we're doing, you know? Like, it's recognizing the psychological changes that instills in our kids. I agree with you. I think building self-esteem is one of the hardest but most important things that we can do for our kids.
Yeah, even like I was in a competition and you know, when they say, you know, I'm a drug addict, I'm a this, I said, you know what? What's your name first? That's what you are.
Yeah.
So your identity is your name, what you are, not what you have, you know.
I have an addiction. I am not my addiction. Right.
I said, don't say that. I said, when you're talking to me, forget about the addiction, it's you as the person.
Yeah, I say that with my kids too. Mm-hmm. Yep, you're not stupid, but your behavior might have been stupid, but you're not stupid, right? Not even stupid. Stupid's a bad word to use with that, but maybe saying like, you know, you're not dumb. You might not have done well on that test, but that's a behavior, not a personality trait. Or like if you, oh, I'm angry. And that's something that's worth noting, is that kids nowadays are labeling themselves. They're wearing their labels. So it's, and not just their gender or sexual orientation identities. I mean, it's everything. It's, I'm depressed. I'm, you know, this. And they have to have these labels. And it's so important to them that they fit into a class. Again, the love and belonging, right? So they're labeling themselves, but then that's also exacerbating the problems. You know, if they label themselves as part of, like, I'm depressed, or, oh, she's just a narcissist, you know, or, oh, he's bipolar, or and that's the labels, and they're labeling each other and they're labeling themselves, and then it's leading to the same thing because, again, they're looking to their peers to identify who they are. And it's interesting to watch and scary, but again, we don't really know the end results of all of these things until we take a step back and see the societal changes that are happening. You know, we think we're doing the right things by supporting certain things. Nobody really knows what's going to happen until these kids grow up into adults and all of a sudden the conversation changes. You know, we got to be willing to change it, though, and to change our perspectives and be willing to accept that change and different methods could be right. You know, we're not all right. It's a right and wrong, right? Just because I think I'm right doesn't mean that you're wrong. You can be right as well. And being able to identify that as just people can get us so much farther.
And that, honestly, is why we're here. At the end of the day, that is why we're here. This was, I thought, an absolutely phenomenal introduction to the topic. I'd love to hear, I mean, we could go all night on this topic. You really could.
Yeah.
And anything with youth, you can delve in for hours. So I really want to thank you, Carissa, for coming out and taking your time to share this topic with us. We have to continue these conversations. I know they're hard. I know, I recognize that, especially for someone who was watching that video and has a young daughter who might be experiencing that same thing. I get that, but if we don't talk about it, this will continue, and 20 years from now, that chart that you saw will be off the page, okay? So, in conclusion, so we can wrap up for the night, I'm sure that there are some wondering, why Parks and Rec and why mental health? Why are we putting these two together? And because we know most agencies provide parks and programs for residents to enjoy their leisure opportunities. But why P&R and mental health topics? And the reason why is actually very simple. It's our commitment to serving our community in whatever capacity in order to advance and foster healthy lifestyles for everyone in our community. For those of you in person, excuse me, I did give you a copy of our latest brochure and the monthly calendar for June. For those online, you can find it at www.pslparks.com and find our brochures and calendars there. One last note from Parks and Rec that I would mention, and that is for the first time, we've done a lot of first times this year, but this year on June 12th, which is Saturday, it is our national organization is National Recreation and Parks Association, and they annually celebrate a National Family Health and Fitness Day, okay? So NRPA has announced that their day, and that we're gonna be supporting as well, is Saturday, June 12th, and what that means to the residents of Port St. Lucie, we're celebrating fitness in whatever way that looks to you. Fitness looks completely different to me than it, I'm sure, does to Carissa, okay? But that's okay. We all know that just to get up and move, that's good. That's a great thing to do. And how that looks among people is different. But that day on June 12th, for in the city of Port St. Lucie, we will have free day passes to either one of our fitness centers. We do have a beautiful fitness center here at the community center that you can come to that day during the normal hours and just come in free and use whatever part of that you want. We also have our second city fitness center, which is over at the Mid-Florida Event Center, and that's the Humana Fitness and Wellness Center at the corner of US 1 and Walton Road. So come into either one of our fitness centers and get some well-being and some self-care. And then that evening on Saturday, June 12th at 6:30, we're going to be actually having a free Zumba class that's offered outside at Village Square at the Mid-Florida Event Center. So that will be hugely popular, and we're actually going to have our communications department come out and take a group photo We've timed it close to sunset, so it'll be really cool out there. And then we're going to submit some photos during July, because July is Parks and Rec Month. And we will choose the best photo that's submitted to our website for Family Health and Fitness Day, and the award of a $100 gift card. So just come out and enjoy the beautiful outdoors and our parks and our fitness centers for the day to show your support of that. So again, I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Thank you again to Carissa for taking your time and sharing this important topic. I'm hopeful that that is not the last time that we will hear this. So thank you all again.